Okay, welcome to all. Welcome to the next in the lecture series of foodborne diseases. And let's do a fast recap on what we've discussed earlier, and then we will further proceed on to where we left. We had left it at the start of discussions on mycotoxins, fungal toxins. Okay, before that, let's just do a recap on what we've discussed so far in the earlier two lectures. So, in the earlier two lectures, we discussed about categorizing the foodborne diseases into poisonings and infections, and chemical poisonings and intoxications under poisoning, intratoxigenicity and invasiveness under infection, and then further went on to discuss the type of intoxication that happens through plant tissues, animal tissues, and microbial toxins that we've discussed. Among microbial toxins, we discussed of algal toxins, mycotoxins, and bacterial toxins. And today we'll be discussing with mycotoxins. That's what I wanted to discuss about. Now, to mention that among bacterial toxins, enterotoxins, neurotoxins, and the ones that interfere with carbohydrate metabolism, we discussed on that. We discussed on the type of enterotoxigenicity that happens through sporulation or through growth and analysis. That also we've discussed. Yeah. So we discussed on how the enterotoxigenicity can happen. That is through sporulation, formation of spores by the infecting microorganism, infecting bacterial, and then they grow inside and form spores inside the human system. Then it can also be because of growth and lysis of the microorganism inside our body. Besides that, in under invasive conditions, how do they invade? Where do they invade? Basically, the intestinal mucosa. Systemic infection could happen. That is the infection spreading from one location to the entire different sections of the body, different parts of the body, different organs get involved. There could be other tissues that the microorganism or the infecting agent, the etiological agent, the pathogen could invade, especially liver and muscles. So these are all things that we discussed, and we also went on to discuss about specifically about the different types of bacterial foodborne diseases, among which we categorize them into intoxication and infection. We discussed about intoxication, which means consumption of toxin released by the microorganism, released by the bacteria into the medium or in the food, and then you consume the toxin along with the food, and that causes the damage that it does. And then about infections, of course, infection, different types of infection. When you consume the microorganism on the whole along with the food, the infecting agent goes inside your system and then they start multiplying. So this is what is all about that we discussed so far. Now, besides the infections that we are discussing here, I would also suggest you to look into the website of CDC and foodsafety.gov. All right. So there are a couple of websites that I don't know if I could show you the couple of websites. I would request if you can look into these websites. They are actually very useful and meaningful. All right. Let me open up these websites. Okay. As you open CDC, Center for Disease Control Atlanta, and foodsafety.gov, they are government websites, US government websites that gives free information, easy and simple information that is understandable, perceivable by anybody. So for a layman as well, the language is very simple so that a layman could also understand. So this is the website I'm talking about, foodsafety.gov. This is a very informative website that you could see. So bacteria and viruses that causes foodborne diseases. So the entire list of organisms have been shown here. Besides that, for each of these organisms, they've been categorized on the sources, the incubation period, symptoms, all of which we've already discussed here. So this is a website that could be visited. Beside this, you also have the website by CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Atlanta. This is also based in US. Now this website also carries a lot of information about the foodborne illnesses. So the foodborne illnesses have been alphabetically arranged, so you could click onto any of these and get the basic and fundamental information about the foodborne diseases that are common. Of course, they definitely discuss about the ones that are more common and prevalent in the American, in the United States of America, but then they're always relatable. You could relate to infections in any part of the world. So this is something that is about bacterial foodborne infection. Now we would be going further ahead with something called as the mycotoxins. All right, infection caused by mycotoxins, that's what we'll be discussing again. This the starting material that I'm going to be discussing here is taken from the website, the WHO website, the link for which is shown here. So let's just basically understand what mycotoxins are. As I had mentioned in my earlier lectures, mycotoxins here refers to fungal toxin. Okay, MICO refers to fungi, and mycology is the study of fungi. When I say fungi, it includes both yeast and molds. All right. So in most cases, the fungal toxins or the mycotoxins are produced by molds. Okay, so that's what we are referring to here. They are released by molds. So mycotoxins are naturally occurring toxins produced by certain molds and can be found in food. All right. So what is the type of foods that they are normally found in? That's what is the next thing that we need to understand. Cereals, nuts, spices, dried foods, apples, and coffee beans. Mostly, I will say they are all agricultural produce that they are more plant-based products, agricultural produce, and they generally get infected by they have moldy growth on them if you don't store them properly. Okay, mainly it is related to their storage. If you don't store the grains, lentils, cereals, pulses in the appropriate way, including fruits and vegetables in the right manner, if you don't store them in the what you call in a cold airy region, airy locations in your warehouse or your storeroom, then they are likely to give rise to mold growth, and this mold growth is what will release the toxins into the food that you are likely to process or consume. So as clearly mentioned here, they are because we don't store them in the right condition. We store them in warm and humid conditions. This is the typical most favorable condition required for fungal growth to happen, and if fungal growth happens, it is most likely that toxins will be released. Okay, that's what we need to understand now. Mycotoxins can cause a variety of adverse health effects and pose a serious health threat to both humans and livestock. Okay, so we are talking about human beings here, and we are also talking about livestock here. All right, so there are two ways by which a human being can get the mycotoxin through food. One is directly consuming food that has been contaminated with mycotoxins, or mycotoxins have been released into the food. That is one way. The other way is through animal products. When I say through animal products, it's not in the animal products that mycotoxins are released, but the livestock consume fodder or feed stuff that have been contaminated with the mycotoxins. So the mycotoxins are carried forward from the plant produce to the animals, and that's how they are carried forward. All right. Now, consumption of mycotoxins can lead to a variety of health complications. It may lead to immunodeficiency, cancer, and also degeneration or health problems related to organs, specifically liver and kidney. We'll be discussing about that in the later half. So what needs to be kept in mind when we talk of mycotoxins is it is mainly attributed because of poor or improper storage conditions. All right, so that is something that we need to understand. We should, as much as possible, avoid storing food for a longer period of time, or even if it has to be a shorter period of time, in a damp, warm location. Okay, it should not be humid, it should not be dark. Then you're obviously giving rise to situations where mold growth could happen. All right, so they are addressing mainly some of the mycotoxins that are very common or more prevalent, I would say. And to start with is aflatoxin. Okay, aflatoxin is the most dreaded, I must tell you. Now, the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India I think it is last year. Last year they released a standard specifying specifically to screen for aflatoxins in milk and dairy products, basically milk and milk based products, because aflatoxin now is growing out to be a serious concern world over. So aflatoxin is the most important of all. Then comes ochratoxin A, patulin, fuminosins, zearalenone, and nivalenol. They are all types of mycotoxins that are released into the food, and through the food chain it could make entry into our human system, in our food, and then finally make entry into our human system and cause good amount of damage that will be discussed, that we've already discussed. Okay, so it can either be I mean, exposure to mycotoxins can happen directly by eating infected food or indirectly from animals that are fed with contaminated feed. Okay, in particular from milk. Okay, that's what we've discussed. So today, after even Food Safety and Standards of Authority of India, last year, as I had mentioned, aflatoxin has been taken as a serious issue, and standards are being reframed to ensure that aflatoxins are specifically being screened in dairy and dairy products as well. So having said that, now let's go and try and understand, the different types of aflatoxins that we've although we have discussed in brief. We will get into the depths of it. Aflatoxin is released or produced mainly by the organisms Aspergillus flavus, Aspergillus parasiticus, and some Penicillium. So point to be noted here is all of them are molds. Okay, all of them are molds. Okay, that is the point to be noted, right? So Aspergillus flavus, Aspergillus parasiticus, and some Penicillium. So they are the agents that produce the aflatoxin. They are mainly found in barley, corn, cottonseed, millets, oats, peanuts. So most, I would say, almost all of the food produce that are kept in the warehouse for a long period of time are likely to carry forward the mycotoxins, especially the fungal toxin aflatoxin. That's common, and it has toxic. These toxins can have toxic effect on a variety of organisms, including human beings. So the list, they have been listed here. They are also carcinogenic, that is, they are cancer causing agents, and they can cause cancer, that have been examined to in the following organisms: trouts, rats, sheep, mice, ducklings, and at times human beings as well. Although human beings are not being reflected here, but it is also possible that they could cause cancer in human beings. So patulin is the next type of mycotoxin that is released by molds. Penicillium species mainly is what is producing these mycotoxins, patulin. Besides them, some of Aspergillus species also produce them. It's what has been listed here. So where apple sap, apple cider, apple juice, so something more related to apple. Okay, and then it can cause toxicity to a variety of organisms that have been listed here, and it can cause cancer in mice. All right. Besides this, ochratoxin, all right, produced by Aspergillus and Penicillium species, all of them have been listed here. Corn, wheat, barley, white beans, peanuts, dough, bread, and hen's eggs. Okay, they're all the source of ochratoxin. They can cause toxicity in rats, chicks, ducklings, and trout. Rats, trout, and chickens again are, I mean, have the risk of getting cancer through the ochratoxin A. And besides this, we have a few more fungal toxins that have been listed here: lutoskirin, stigmatocystin, penicillinic acid, alimentric toxic aleucia, okay, roquefortin. So they are all toxins that are released again by different varieties or different types of different genus of species of fungi, mostly molds. So you would never see yeast genus or species being reflected here, and there are different sources that have been mentioned here. So penicillin roqueforti is something is a little different to the rest of them because they are all mostly related to dry products, but roquefortin, okay, is something which is released by the bacterium Penicillium roqueforti, and it is related to cheese. Okay, this is something which is different to the rest of them, so it is point to be noted. Okay, and then you have these what you call causing toxicity in mice, carcinogenicity because of rock protein is not known, not studied as yet. So this is all it's about. So this is all about fungal toxin, mycotoxin. So it is categorized under food poisoning. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. Now, besides these, all right, you have viral infectious agents as well, right? Poliomyelitis, although the world claims to have, India at least claims to have eradicated polio, but polio is still a possibility. Poliomyelitis are there are cases of poliomyelitis happening across and other parts of the world, especially in the African continent. So it is always possible or likely that we could have relapse or recurrence of poliomyelitis in Indian subcontinent as well. So we need to ensure poliomyelitis is caused by a virus, poliovirus. Three types of poliovirus: 1, 2, and 3. Foods usually involved is milk and other beverages and prepared food. Other beverages and prepared food. So other modes of transmission, case or carrier, contaminated water could also be a source. Besides food, incubation period is pretty long, could be pretty long, between 5 to 35 days. Signs and symptoms: fever, vomiting, headache, pain in muscular groups, and finally paralysis. So it starts gradually from your intestinal tract, the gastrointestinal tract, the digestive tract, and then ends up in the muscles, causing paralysis. So how do we ensure that we prevent the spread or occurrence of the disease? Personal cleanliness, adequate heating of food, so they are primary. I would say adequate heating of food comes first, because irrespective of whether or not clean, you need to ensure that food that you eat is thoroughly cooked, or the water that you consume is thoroughly disinfected or boiled. All right. Then personal cleanliness, of course, matters. It does. And then ensure that the area is the food processing area or your food is free from pest infestation. You don't allow flying insects to rest on them, so ensure to keep them secure. That's one. Infectious hepatitis is the next one. Hepatitis here refers to hepatitis. The moment we say hepatitis, inflammation of the liver, that could also be caused by virus. Hepatitis A virus is the one that is causing infectious hepatitis. Now, mind you, it is infectious hepatitis. There is hepatitis B, which is normally STD or through exchange of bloody fluids. We are not referring to hepatitis B here, we are referring to hepatitis A virus infection. It ends up in a condition called a jaundice, which we know of, where the liver gets inflamed and excess secretion of bile happens. It's a condition. So the infectious, the foods involved could be milk or any sort of food that is contaminated with hepatitis, because water is one of the big source of hepatitis A infection. So it can be contaminated through water also. So the infectious, the incubation time can vary between 10 to 15 days. So the mean average day is 25 days at least it takes. Jaundice is approximately one half of case. Loss of appetite, gastrointestinal disturbance, they are all the symptoms or conditions that happen because of hepatitis A infection. Now, of course, cooking, thorough cooking, disinfection of water. So these are two main prime things that needs to be kept in mind in order to avoid most of the foodborne diseases. Ensure the water is safe, potable standard, and they are disinfected, and ensure thorough cooking of food. All right. So these are two things that needs to be kept in mind. Acute non-bacterial gastroenteritis, Coxsackie and ecovirus. Okay, there is also something called the rotavirus, which is not mentioned here, but that could also be considered into this. For that, it's better if we look into the website of CDC, Center for Disease Control, or the foodsafety.gov. That gives a lot of information about rotavirus as well. So Coxsackie and ecovirus, they are viral agents as yet to be identified, as yet unidentified, possibly foodborne, but as yet this mode of transmission is unestablished. Although they talk of it, but their mode of transmission is not established that it could transmit through food, but however, they are being considered here. So the incubation, if it happens, it can, the symptoms may show up between 20 to 60 hours. So shorter incubation period. fever, constitutional symptoms, headache, abdominal pain, vomiting, and mostly this is self-limiting disease. Okay, so the infection might subside if the immune status of the individual is good enough. It will be self-limiting. Um all conditions that are to be kept in mind is safe water for drinking, and food consumed should be thoroughly cooked, right? So they are all viral uh, uh, infections that have been implicated of having been foodborne. All right. Now comes the last but not the least. That is um, the parasitic infections or the protozoal infections. Now, viral infections, people talk of it. Bacterial infections, people talk of it. And mycotoxins, of course, there's a lot of emphasis now. So, world over, across the globe, there's a lot of discussion happening in about the fungal infections as well, the mycotoxins as well. But then, what seems missing is discussions on parasitic infections that are transmitted by food. Although I would say some of them are not very prevalent, but then that doesn't warranty of it not being considered for discussion to the extent the other etiological agents are being considered. Parasitic infections are equally important. I would say I remember having read. I do not know if my memory is good enough or my statistics are good enough. I remember having read that 60% of the population in the subcontinent, the Asian, some parts of the Asian subcontinent, 60% of the population have amoebiasis. All right, I do not know how much that statistics is true or if my memory is good enough. If I remember that well, if that be the case, you could imagine the gravity of the situation, the magnitude of the situation. It's big. All right. So we need to be really careful of what, if you are going to be, if you are part of the food processing industry or the food industry, then we better be sure of what we give, what we serve our consumers, our customers. And if we are consumers ourselves, let us be very sure of what we eat, what we get from the market, especially in the Indian subcontinent. There's a lot, not much of emphasis on the food safety, although Food Safety and Standards Authority of India is trying to create a lot of awareness and giving a lot of thrust and emphasis on creating awareness about food safety concerns in India. But it's always better to know where we are heading. Now, let us start with anisakiasis. Right? I think just merely by looking at the tabulation, I may not be able to give you much or explain to you the magnitude of the kind of infections that or complications that the parasitic diseases can cause. So, I think I would make it more clear or vivid by showing you some pictorial images of the kind of infestation that happens in our body by parasitic infections. Okay, so let me see if I could share a couple. Yeah, so now if you can actually, if you're able to look at this image here, look at this image. Uh, this is a worm that is residing in the digestive tract, an image of the worm that is causing anasciasis. Okay, and this is a live worm inside the intestinal tract of an individual. Okay, so you can understand the kind of complications the presence of a worm can cause, the disturbance that it causes. It's a chronic problem, it's not an acute problem, it's a chronic problem. Many of individuals in the human population, in the Indian population, may not even realize or recognize or identify or get diagnosed of intestinal worms. They may uh, ignore the fact that they could be having repeated abdominal discomfort kind of a situation, pain, abdominal discomfort, but they might just they pop up a couple of tablets, pills, and then give a rest to the situation for a while, assuming that it is some sort of a stomach disorder, and then stomach temporary complication, and then get away with it. Most population do not get their situation diagnosed in the right way, and worms like these could survive in our body for a long period of time, and what we eat, half of it is consumed by them. Okay, this is of the worm that causes anischiasis. All right, now if I'm able to show more images, all right, let me see. I don't know, I'm not able to. Yep, let me. Okay, this is a tapeworm. Okay, this is a tapeworm uh, that was taken out of the human system, human intestine. You can imagine the length of the worm inside our body. All right, so I do not know if you're able to read this. These are all images that are picked up from Google just to explain the magnitude here. If you're able to read this here, it may not be very clear, but then let me read it out for you. Tapeworms reaching up to 60 feet long are the biggest parasites that live in humans. 60 feet long. All right. So that is the kind of infection that we could be passing on to. If we are from the food industry, we could be passing on. Now this is, again, you can see that this is a live image of the intestinal tract, the digestive system. You see the white thing here, this is the worm that is living inside an individual's body. That is the sushi. That is basically taken from a intestine of a human being that who consumes sushi, a Japanese delicacy. All right, you can look at this. If you're able to see this, that is the length of a tapeworm that can reside inside a human intestine. All right, this is a worm. If you could see this, it's not noodles, it's a worm. Right. So my objective showing you these images is not to make it obnoxious or nauseating. It is to give due importance to parasitic and protozoal infections that generally gets avoided, not considered, not given importance as far as foodborne diseases are concerned. Now, anischiasis, the worm that I showed, the first image that I showed, it is caused by a nematode, Anisakis species. Foods usually involved raw or insufficiently cooked fish. So sushi is kind of a seafood that is more consumed in Japan. Okay, the incubation period can be several days. Okay, signs and symptoms: irritation of throat and digestive tract. So you can imagine irritation in the throat and the digestive tract. You may say it's throat infection. You may want to have just hot water, feel relaxed, relieved for some period of time, then it may relapse. If there is persistent problem there, despite the fact of your taking medications to address the complication, it is better we get it diagnosed. Okay, so measures, cook fish thoroughly. In all of these, it is what is to be ensured is cooking. Okay, 72 degrees Celsius is the thumb rule. All right. Then comes amoebic dysentery. This is what I mentioned. Amoebiasis, amoebic dysentery is very common in the Asian population, caused by Entamoeba histolytica. Foods involved: water contaminated with sewage, so it's mainly water. Moist food contaminated with human feces. All right, that's a possibility there. Several days to 4 weeks. Diarrhea of varying severity. Fatalities not uncommon. Fatalities not uncommon. Okay, they are common. Protect water supplies, cleanliness in food preparation, ensure proper disposal of human excreta. So this directly points to personal hygiene. Now there is an image that shows this as well. Let me see if I can show you that. All right. Now this is a cross-sectional image of our intestinal tissue. All right. So if you're able to see this, what do you call the flask-shaped portion here, this is an ulcer. Okay, you know of ulceration that happens in our mouth, right? So there are ulcers that happen in our intestinal tract or stomach as well. So what happens? Entamoeba histolytica, the cyst makes a pore in our lining, the intestinal lining, the mucosal region, makes entry inside the tissue, causes the damage, and makes this bottle-shaped arrangement for itself to survive. So this ulcer, it's not just one localized place. This can be different ulcers within the intestinal tract in an individual. And what happens? You could imagine, you can relate this to the ulcers that you get in your mouth at times. So what happens? You find it difficult to eat, swallow, or even speak at times if the ulceration is heavy. Now you can imagine what happens in your stomach. So stomach is something, your intestinal tract, you have this bowel movement, the peristaltic movement, which pushes the bolus, the food mixed with mucus into the system. It pushes it down through the digestive tract. So it is a wavery motion that happens. Every time the wavery motion passes through a region where there is an ulcer, okay, the pain would erupt, and the pain would be at times maybe not bearable enough for an individual to sustain. So if there are multiple ulcers because of amoebiasis, so you can imagine the complication. So what happens? Pain is one. The other thing is, because of the pain, because of the complication, the food gets pushed and digestion doesn't happen, absorption doesn't happen to the extent it should happen in the intestinal tract. All right. So this is amoebiasis. This is also pretty common, and they say fatality rate is not uncommon. All right. Fatality is not uncommon, right? So that is amoebiasis. Beef tapeworm, Taenia saginata. Okay, beef tapeworm, Taenia saginata. This is especially for those who consume beef. May not be very prevalent in Indian conditions, but then yes, in the foreign world, beef consumption is common. Raw or insufficiently cooked beef containing live larvae. So we do not know. We cannot go looking for live larvae. That is not part of a system that is followed in the food industry to look for live larvae among in the red meat. Okay, when it is processed. So it is always better to have them cooked thoroughly, cooked properly. Okay, that is the thumb rule. Okay, you may have a veterinarian to inspect the meat, but that is not practicable in every case. So it's always better, whatever you eat thoroughly cooked. All right, it may the incubation period may be for several weeks. Abdominal pain, hungry feeling, vague discomfort. It's a kind of discomfort that cannot be narrated, but there is a sort of a discomfort which is felt all through the day. All right. Now similarly, there is something called as the fish tapeworm. This is beef tapeworm. This is fish tapeworm, Diplobothrium latum. That is what the image that I showed earlier, the second image, the tape like thing. Both Taenia saginata, Taenia solium, and of course the Diplobothrium also, they are all tapeworms. So they are the ones that have this long slender structure, tape like structure, that is that could infest your intestine. Again, Diplobothrium, poorly cooked fish, insufficiently cooked fish, 3 to 6 weeks is the incubation time. The signs could be usually none. Okay, no signs or symptoms, just for anemia that could show up when the infection rate is very high. So how do you even identify? The person is suffering, he doesn't even get to diagnose what the problem is. Okay, cook fish thoroughly, avoid eating raw smoked fish. Okay, they're all typical. Poke tapeworm, Taenia solium. This is Taenia saginata, this is Taenia solium. All right. Consumption of pork. Okay, insufficiently cooked pork, the time could take anywhere several weeks it might take, varies from a mild chronic digestive disorder to severe malaise with encephalitis, may be fatal. Okay, so you need to ensure that the meat is thoroughly cooked. All right, that is what that you need to ensure, right? And then again, trichinosis, Trichinella spiralis. Trichinella spiralis, that's the organism that causes trichinosis. Raw or insufficiently cooked pork and pork products, seafoods, very common. Usually 9 days. The incubation time could be 9 days, but vary from 2 to 28 days. In heavy infection, it could show up within 24 hours. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, muscular pains, fever, labored breathing, swelling of eyelids, occasionally fatal. So Trichinella infection from the intestinal region, the worst thing is it can spread to different parts of the body. And eye infection, you can actually see worms coming out of your eyes, and that can happen in Trichinella spiralis. All right, that's what they say. Swelling of eyelid. Cook pork and pork products thoroughly. Freezing, that is mainly temperature conditions need to be kept in mind and ensure that they are safe. So these are all parasitic or protozoal infections that we need to keep in mind. Okay, helminthic infections that we need to keep, protozoal and helminthic infections. Okay, so that's where we end. We have summed up the foodborne diseases, the list of foodborne diseases, and a brief discussion on all of that. At the end of this lecture, I would like to mention again here, for those of us who are consumers, we need to be doubly sure of what we eat, and because we do not know, the food that we consume need not necessarily be processed in front of us, so we do not know the hygiene status, the conditions that have been that are being maintained, the way they are being processed. We do not know the personal hygiene of the individual who is involved in the preparation. We are not aware of that. So we better be careful about what we eat. That's what I am trying to say. And for those who are involved in food processing industry, it's not just being cautious about what we prepare and what we serve to the community, to the consumers. We need to understand we are ethically and morally responsible for the foodborne disease that may have been transmitted through the food that we serve the consumers. So we are morally and ethically responsible. Okay, so having understood foodborne diseases in length, I'm sure we would be a lot more cautious, irrespective of whether we are consumers or food manufacturers. All right, that's all I need to mention. That's all for this lecture. Thank you so much. Bye bye.